Can I just take a nap? Oh, I gotta stretch my legs out. Hello everybody, my name is Kelsey and we're about to get very, very nerdy with my April wrap-up. So I have so many books to talk to you about that I read in April. April was like ridiculously stressful to start off with because if you remember, I had like the most ridiculous TBR, I think ever, and I ended up reading 15 books this month. So guess we're fine. So strap in, we're gonna be here for a while. We have quite a few books to go through. Let's try not to talk forever about them, but let's get right into the stats. So like I said, I read 15 books this month, and that is over 5,453 pages, and that is 6 audiobooks, 2 physical books, 1 ebook, and 6 kind of mixed books. And of the kind of age category they are geared towards, I had quite a variety this month. I actually read more options than usual. I read 2 middle grade books, 2 YA books, 1 new adult, and 10 adult books. So quite a lot of adult books, but I did read some more genres this month as well, which doesn't usually happen sometimes. My genres were a little all over the place as well. We read 6 contemporary, 2 historical fiction, 4 romance books, 2 fantasy, and 1 nonfiction. And then as far as my star ratings go, they are pretty contained as usual. We had 4 5-star reads, 10 4-star reads, and 1 3-star read. The first book that I ended up reading this month, I actually started technically last month, but I finished it on the first day of the month in April, and that is Mall Unbound by Aisha Saeed. This is a middle grade book by an author that I've never read anything by her before, but I do have a book that she co-wrote with Becky Albertalli. Now I haven't read it yet, but I love Becky Albertalli and I wanted to kind of give her a try before I really got into something else where she co-wrote with somebody. So I saw that the Homebody Book Club, which used to be the 3 Blondes and a Book club, I'll make sure I leave their YouTube and information down below. They kind of like did a rebrand and it sounded really interesting, and I saw this at my library and it was very, very short audiobook. I'd run out of things to read at the end of last month and I decided to give it a try. So I did. I think I gave it a full 5. I did. I gave it 5 stars. So this follows our main character Amal, and this takes place in Pakistan, in a small village in Pakistan, and Amal just wants to be a teacher. She loves going to school. She loves reading. It's like a big part of her personality. This book really tackles the topics of servitude because of some debts that her father has and a situation she gets herself into. She ends up being forced to be the servant of this kind of like ruling family in the village. Everyone's afraid of them. And so most of this book takes place while she's at this house kind of being said servant. So this is very interesting. It's written very, very simplistically. Obviously it is made for younger readers, but it's written in a way that I think every single person can read it. I honestly forgot this was middle grade at times because I was so invested in what was happening, but it's very interesting to see this young girl's perspective on the world, on a world that is very, very different than my own personally. I think it's a very good book for younger readers so that they can get experience to different cultures that they didn't, or like they weren't normally exposed to. I definitely learned some things here. It definitely tackles some tough subjects. Like I said, it talks a lot about indentured servitude. Did it in a way that was tough and like, you know, it's a tough subject, but it's a way to expose younger kids, I guess, to these tougher subjects. And I thought it was done very, very well. I really enjoyed it. I listened to this on audiobook, and the minute I finished it, I went out and got my own copy because I loved it so much. But I highly recommend if you want kind of a look at a different culture and a book that tackles harder topics for younger readers. I think it does a great job of both of those things. The next book that I ended up picking up was 3 Sisters, 3 Queens by Philippa Gregory. This is the next in her kind of companion series that I have. I have so many books, like 20 plus books by her, but they're all set around the Plantagenet and Tudor court. This specifically follows Catherine of Aragon, who was Henry VIII's first wife, Margaret, who was Henry VIII's sister, and Mary, who was Henry VIII's younger sister. And it's 3 of them, And it's just kind of like how they each became the queen of France, England, and Scotland, and they each became kind of like sister queens. But this book this takes place fully in the perspective of Margaret, who becomes the Queen of Scotland, who gets married at like the age of 13, I think. Like, she's ridiculously young. Normal for that time, but, you know, ridiculously young. And it's the three of them as they try to be sisters, but mostly try to be queens and, like, hold their power at a time where Henry VIII was starting to, like, go a little crazy. And just seeing how these three women completely reacted to him differently, because Margaret was rarely around him. Once she got married, she basically stayed in Scotland and she did go back to England a couple of times, but not really, was never really around him when he went crazy. And so she's getting these experiences and hearing these things from Catherine of Aragon and her younger sister Mary, kind of telling her about this. And it's very interesting to see how court gossip and how political intrigue is such a big part of his court. It's very thick, but I flew through this incredibly quickly. I was very annoyed by Margaret at first because, like I said, this book starts when she is, I think, 12 or 13. It's right about the time, right before she gets married. It's when Catherine comes over to marry Henry's older brother, Arthur. He is the king first, and then I think they were only married for like a very short, maybe, I'm not even sure they were married a year, to be honest. I think months they were married, and then she was in this limbo before she married Henry. And so it takes place right as she comes to court. And Mary is 12. She's super, super jealous. She thinks that she's the best because she's the queen, or she's going to be the Queen of Scotland, and she's the first princess, and she deserves to have the right to blah, blah, blah. And so pride is a huge thing with her, and as you're reading, you see her grow up. And this is the thing that Philippa Gregory does that I've never really noticed, I think, before. I think I knew it was there, but I don't think I ever really noticed it. Of, like, this book takes place from she's 12 to, like, mid-30s, maybe even more than that. Maybe she's hit her 40s. And you see her grow up. You see her grow up from this 12-year-old who is super, super jealous of Catherine, and you just want to punch her in the face because she's super annoying, to this woman who's had to be in control of Scotland for so many years and try to create, like, there's so much political issue and war in Scotland, and she's just trying to keep it for her son. And you see her grow up. You see her hit her teenage years. You see her hit her mid-20s, and, like, as she grows up, her writing and her thoughts mature. And it's just fascinating to me that a writer can do that. Like, I know that she had a lot of, like, space to work with, but she did it in a way that I didn't notice until it already had happened. It was very well done. I really liked it. Her books are super, super dense, so you have to kind of enjoy the time period and the material that they're talking about. So I enjoy Tudor England a lot. I think it's fascinating to read about. So I love Philippa Gregory's writing, but she does her research. So everything in here is so incredibly well researched. And she always has, like, large author's notes at the end that kind of explains what she knows about these women before she goes into it. And I always find that fascinating. So I really loved this. I gave it 4.5 stars. It's not my favorite of hers, but it's really, really high up there. And I'm so glad that I finally read it. The next one that I ended up picking up this month was my e-arc, or at least one of the e-arcs I needed to pick up this month, and that is I Speak Boy by Jessica Brody. This is not out yet. Well, it might be out by the time you're seeing this video. I'm not entirely sure. It comes out relatively close to the beginning of May. I ended up giving this a whole 5 stars. It is a middle grade kind of reimagining of The Story of Emma by Jane Austen. And I think it does it in such an incredible way, because while you're reading, you're seeing hints to little things that, like, if you know Emma, you're like, oh, that name is that person. And you're just really interesting to see all the little hints that Jessica Brody does to the original. But if you don't know Jane Austen and you don't know Emma, you can totally enjoy this book without that knowledge at all, because it totally stands on its own as a book, and it's probably one of my favorite retellings of a Jane Austen book. I haven't read many that are based on Emma, but this one was really good. So this follows our main character, M. This book starts with an entire fiasco of her trying to set up her best friend Harper with this boy that she is convinced that Harper likes, and that likes Harper, and it doesn't go so well. And so then one day she wakes up to this app on her phone that is now called I Speak Boy. It used to be like I Speak or I Translate or something, and now it's this thing. And when she opens it, it'll listen to conversations that happen. It basically translates boys' thoughts of like what they say and what they mean are two very different things, and then she becomes this big like matchmaking person at their school. So it's got the general plot line of kind of the stuff that happens in Emma, but it's a completely different story. It was so much fun. I loved the invention of this app. I thought it was so incredibly, I don't know, inventive, but at the same time, I went back to middle school. I went back to middle school and early high school, and I felt attacked in this book because I was like, this was me. Like, this is what I was like. So this book is I find it very realistic for the middle school experience. So I feel like it would be really cool for people who are in middle school to read this book, because girls would get a much better idea of kind of what the middle school boy is going through, because I felt like some of the translations are very, very realistic as well. Because what they say and what they mean are totally different things. We all know that. It was just very inventive. I thought it was so much fun. I flew through this book. I just kept reading and reading and reading, and it was an ebook. And ebooks tend to take me a lot longer to get through, and it took me a few days and I was done. I loved it so much. It got 5 stars. I cannot wait to get my actual copy of it. I do have a Goodreads review of it, so I'll leave that linked below if you want to get like some more information, but I highly, highly recommend if anything I said sounds interesting to you, because it was great. The next book that I picked up was a book that was one of the pre-orders for April that I was very excited about, and I picked it up because, well, first off, I was excited about it, but I picked it up because I had requested the NetGalley arc like many, many months ago and knew I wasn't going to get around to it, or I wasn't going to get it. And then a week before it came out, they gave me the NetGalley arc, and I was like, are you kidding me? I got the physical copy before I got the NetGalley arc. It was a whole thing. You didn't need to know all of that. But that is To Love and to Loathe by Martha Waters. This is the companion to her book To Have and to Hoax, which I read a couple of months ago. I loved that book. I thought it was fantastic, and I couldn't wait to get my hands on the sequel. Kind of, I say companion sequel because, like, it takes place after the events of the first book, so some things are definitely spoiled, and there are some things that are hinted at in the first book that, like, are talked about through this book. But I guess you could read them out of order if you really wanted to. But I gave this one 4.5 stars because I didn't love it nearly as much as the first book, but I still really enjoyed it. I still loved Martha Waters' writing. She is super sarcastic. She is super funny. I just like her take on things. I will say one thing that I noticed this time around that was true the first time, but I don't think I really focused on it, is that these books are not historically accurate. So if you're going into it wanting a historically accurate book, I would say that these are not your things, just because there are certain situations that our characters get into and certain things that are being said that I'm like, that wouldn't historically happen. But other than that, they are very well done. One thing that this author can do very well is tension. This book is not nearly as steamy as I was expecting it to be, but the tension was there. The tension was great. I loved it so much. I love seeing these two people who did not like each other come together and start to like each other, and my heart was happy. This book follows the best friends of our main characters from the last book. So it follows Diane and Jeremy, and Diane is very happy in her widowhood. She's been widowed for a while. Her husband wasn't bad to her, but like she didn't really want a husband, and now she's got this freedom. But she's a little lonely. And then Jeremy is an entire, like, he's a rake. He just sleeps around. And his last fling didn't end very well, and the lady told him that basically, like, he wasn't so great in bed, and he, like, it completely startled him. It was very not what he expected. And so he comes to Diane and basically is like, look, I know that we're not great, and we're not, like, best friends and stuff, and, like, you kind of hate me, but I have a proposition for you. Will you sleep with me at this 2-week country retreat that I've got for everybody? That way you can tell me how I can be better, and I can help you signal to people that you want to take lovers. I do think I enjoyed the first one more, but this one was great, and I'm so glad that I read it. I do have a Goodreads review of this one as well, so I'll leave that linked below. The next book that I ended up picking up was the second volume of My Brother's Husband by Jingoro Tagame. This one I ended up giving 4 stars to. I read the first volume last month, so go check that out because I'm not going to have too much to say on this. A lot of my thoughts are very similar to the first time. I did like this one a little bit more than the first one because the relationship between our two main male characters, like the friendship is really growing there. I should tell you what this is about because that was very confusing. This book follows our main character right here, who lives in Tokyo with his daughter, and his brother died about a year ago, and his brother is gay and lived in Canada and was married, but like our main character didn't really ever talk to him very often and just kind of like never met the husband. And so in the first volume, the husband comes to Tokyo to visit the family and kind of get to know his husband's world a little bit more. And so this just continues on from that. But I liked it because our main, like our brother and the husband, really solidified their friendship and kind of their understanding of each other, and they definitely had some tough topics because they live in a society, or at least the Tokyo part of the society is not as accepting of gay people. And so you see that and how people are reacting to them being out and about. But you also see this little like core family grow because his daughter is like obsessed with this man. She loves her uncle. She thinks he's like the coolest thing ever. And it's just their little family. And it grows, and it's so cute. I loved their relationship. I loved the possibility of where it could go in the future, and I thought that this did some really great things. So like I said, I gave it 4 stars. I thought it was very good. The next book that I read was Beneath the Sugar Sky by Shauna Maguire. I gave this 4 stars. This is the 3rd in her Wayward Children's series, which is all about kids who go through magical doors to other worlds, and then they end up back in the real world. Our world, if you will, and they're not really believed by their family, and so they're sent to this kind of wayward children's school as a way to kind of rehabilitate them, get them back to normal, but actually it's run by this woman who went through a door herself, so she really understands kind of what these kids are going through. So this takes place both in different worlds as well as at the school. It has kind of an adventure plot line to it, which is different. I have read this before. I think I read this last summer, but I don't remember anything about what I thought back then. So I assume my feelings are the same. I don't know. But I did really enjoy this. I ended up giving this one 5 stars. I thought it was a lot of fun. I liked it because we got to see some of the worlds that we had been hinted at in the first book specifically, and it was really cool to see some characters that we knew, some new characters, some new worlds, things like that, and it was just a lot of fun. I will say this book makes you want candy, because the world that they are primarily focused on is the confection world, and that is where like everything is made out of candy. And I just really loved it. The rep in here is great. Not everybody in these books is white, not everybody in these books is straight. You have a wide variety of different people, and that just feels very realistic. So I like that the author has, you know, layered that in. But it was fun. I really enjoyed it. It actually had somewhat, I feel like, more of a plot than some of the previous books did, and I really enjoyed it. So I can't wait to continue with the series. I love her writing. It's so incredibly, like, beautifully described, and also she can fit an entire story and like no pages I don't understand, but I loved it, so this was great. The next one I ended up picking up was Honey Girl by Morgan Rogers. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. This book was very, very good, but you have to go into it not expecting a fluffy contemporary romance. There is a romance. It is a very central portion of the plot. However, that is not what this book is about. I would categorize this book as being a contemporary with romance elements, rather than it being a romance that's set contemporarily. Is that a word? You know what I mean. This basically follows our main character, Grace, who has just finished her PhD in astronomy, and she goes to Vegas with some of her friends as kind of like a, I'm done with my master's, I'm good, whew, you know, like freedom. And then she wakes up married to a woman and decides to take a break and go to New York and meet said woman, and what happens from there. Now that is just like the surface of what happens in this book, because this book really is about this woman coming to terms with herself, because she came from a very, very, very strict household. Her father was in the army, I think, and he is very like, this is your plan, you have to be great, you have to focus, you have to kind of like bury all of your feelings down, and that way you can succeed. And so she has a lot of kind of issues and unspoken stuff with her dad. She has a lot of mental health issues as well that she's never talked about, and so this book is just kind of like the catalyst of everything. So I would say definitely trigger warnings for particularly mentions of self-harm. I don't think, if I can remember correctly, there's nothing on the actual page. I think this is an incredible debut novel because it tackles all of these super, super tough subjects with, like, mental illness, being part of the LGBTQIA+ community, being a woman in STEM, being a black woman in STEM. So, like, there's all of this stuff that she has to tackle and kind of like what she wants to do with her life. It was going one way and now she's not quite sure if that's the way that she wants to do and like that's the way that she wants to go. So it definitely has its lighthearted moments and the romance is, oh, I ship it, but that's not the purpose of it. It's definitely a little harder hitting. It's definitely a little, I guess, darker than you would expect from a lighthearted contemporary romance about getting married in Vegas, because that's not really what it is. So I think it was great. I loved every second of it. I loved watching this woman just kind of explore herself, I guess, and come to terms. It's kind of like a coming of age, but like later in life, kind of like figuring out what you want to do with your life. And I thought it was incredible, and I can't wait to see what other things this author has in store for the future. The next book that I ended up picking up was another arc from NetGalley, so I will have the Goodreads review of this book, and that is The Duke Undone by Joanna Laurel. This one I think I gave it 4. Yeah, I gave it 4 stars. I thought this was incredibly fun. It follows this woman who is a painter, and she stumbles across this very, very naked man in an alley and has never seen a nude man before because it's historically set, and obviously women would never see a naked man until they got married, theoretically. And she's fascinated by it, so she paints him. So a few months later, this, our Duke, who's the naked man in the alley, discovers that this painting exists and comes to confront the lady who painted it. And due to circumstances that take many chapters to get through, they strike up a bargain of like, he's going to help her with her house because she and her aunt are living in this row of houses that are about to be condemned and shut down, and they have no place to go, and she's going to help this Duke discover where his lost sister went. And the tension between them is incredible from the minute they meet. It's there. One thing I found super interesting about this book is it's the first time I've read a book where the main 2 characters are not equal in their economic status, because our main male lead is a Duke. He's got lots of money. But our main female lead is definitely from a poorer kind of system. She and her aunt is a seamstress. She is living paycheck to paycheck. She is at a school for painting and trying to like get money through painting, but it's not, you know, always as lucrative. So they're living, you know, paycheck to paycheck, if you can, in the Regency England. So they're from very, very different worlds. And so I was going through this going, there is no way this is going to end well, because it can't. And one thing I will say about this book is it was quite a lot of fun. I enjoyed my time reading it. However, there's no way this is historically accurate. The situations that they are in, the situations that people find them in, there's no way. There's also no way that the ending would have happened the way it happened. And there's just little things that I'm like, if you're going into this expecting it to be some historical fiction, realistic thing, it's not. It's ridiculousness, but it's ridiculousness that is fun, and I loved every second of it. So I'm excited to see what other things that this author comes out with. I think this is her debut, if I am correct. So this is not my favorite thing that I've ever read, that's a historical fiction book, but it still got 4 stars because it was quite a lot of fun. The next book that I ended up picking up, or at least finishing, because that was the prompt for my TBR basket, was Among the Janets by Deborah Yafe. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. This is a non-fiction book that explores the fandom that surrounds Jane Austen culture. So Deborah Yafe is a journalist, and that's like one of the things that she puts in her kind of author note, which I think is really important to kind of mention, is that this is a work of journalistic writing. This is not a historical piece. It's not a critical piece about, you know, the historical whatever you want to say about Jane Austen. No, this one went around from different people who love Jane Austen and celebrate it in very different aspects of the fandom. This book is very interesting because each chapter is kind of about a different person. So you have a wide range of people and how they celebrate their love of Jane Austen. There are chapters in here about the people who created the, oh, I can't remember what it's called, like the North American Jane Austen Association or something like that, about people who go to that. It's about people who find like who really look critically at the work and talk about kind of like maybe the situations that some of these characters were in, or if some of these characters had specific mental illnesses, or people who wrote fan fiction that turns into books. There's a book mentioned in here that I was like, that sounds familiar, and I have it on my shelf, and I didn't realize it was the same author. So it's just really interesting. You have to like Jane Austen. You have to care about Jane Austen if you are going to enjoy this book at all. But I found it fascinating by all these people and how they each related to Jane Austen in a different way, and this woman's just experience through it all. So I really enjoyed this. It took me a while to get through it, but I enjoyed it and I gave it 4 stars. The next book that I ended up picking up was Mermaid Moon by Suzanne Kokol. So I picked this up for the Homebody Book Club yet again for the month of April. It looked really, really pretty. It sounded really interesting, so I thought I would give it a try. So this follows our main character, Sana, and she is a mermaid, and her birth is kind of a mystery because her father is a mermaid and he fell in love with a human, and that's how our main character came to be. However, during the birth, something happened where there's like a witch that's like a mermaid witch, and she helped with the birth, but in doing so, she created this kind of a mystery surrounding it, so no one knows who this woman's mother is. They know she's human, they know she exists, that's it. That's all they can kind of conjure up in their brain. So our main character is trying to figure out who her mom is. She wants to meet her mom. And so she kind of apprentices for this witch that created the kind of like forgetfulness. And this witch kind of sends her to land to find her mom. And in doing so, she also has to do something for this witch, but she's not really sure what it is. This witch is very kind of like cryptic. And that's basically all you know going into this. I gave this 3 stars because I'm still not quite sure what I read. I think the writing is very, very fantastical. It's very imaginative. You can really like envision what this author is saying on the page. I found that very interesting. It does switch back and forth between first and third person. First person is when you're in our main character's head, but third person is when you're kind of in everybody else's head, seeing what's going on. I really don't even know what to say about this because it's very like I read it and I know what happens, but I'm still confused as to why this book was needed, I guess is the way that I can describe it. It's very similar to how I felt when I was reading After Alice by Gregory Maguire, of like, okay, I get that this is a story, I understand what's happening in the story, my question is, why was this story needed? And that's kind of my question with this book is, I guess, why? So I didn't fall in love with it like I'm sure other people did, and I liked the idea behind it. I thought it was going to be very, very fascinating, and even if this book got 1 star, I'm going to keep it because it's like the most beautiful book I own, but it's just okay, you know? Like, I've already forgotten most of what happens. I don't know. I got a weird vibe from it, so it's just okay, you know? It's just okay. But I read it, so there's that. Next book that I picked up was In Bed with the Highlander by Maya Banks. This is the book that I'm buddy reading with my friend Taylor. I will leave all of her information down below. But we've been reading Maya Banks books for the last couple of months. We are going to continue. I'm very excited. But this was just the most recent one that we read. It's the first and their, oh, I got this wrong last time, Macabre trilogy, I think is what it's called. But basically it's a trilogy that follows these 3 brothers, the Macabre brothers, and this first one follows the Laird. So this book in particular follows our female main character, who is the bastard child of the king. Well, not the current sitting king, the king's brother, who used to be king. But she's been out and hiding because with this title, with this recognition, comes a huge dowry. She gets this land, she gets this castle, she gets a ton of money to her husband, whoever she ends up marrying. So she's been hiding out in a nunnery because she wants to eventually find someone who can protect her. But of course, everyone is out to find her because she comes with this land who is like this land is like very prominent on where it is. But like I said, she's hiding in this nunnery, and then she kind of gets kidnapped by this other guy who I can't remember what his name is, but he's not a great human. And she escapes from that, and then is taken in by the Macabre clan. And the king, or the Laird there, and her create a bond. I've discovered, especially with like what both Taylor and I have discovered, is that Maya Banks writes incredibly incredibly strong-willed main characters who push against kind of the norm for women. Now in this book there's a lot of talk of women's roles, and it focuses a lot on that, which was slightly uncomfortable, which is why this one only got 4.5 stars from me, because like it was just so much, and it wasn't even like there was a purpose to it in the end. It was always there. Like, it was a huge thing. They talked about it all the time of like, this is women's work, or don't do that, that is man's work, or you women stay in your role, like all of that kind of stuff, which I'm wondering if she was trying to make it historically accurate for the time period because it's set in like the Scottish Highlands, but it was just too, if you're gonna make your female characters as strong-willed as you are, you can't be doing this. That's just too much. With that being said, however, I love her writing. I love her characters. I'm so excited to continue reading things by her because she writes these incredible characters and they are so sassy and I love all of them. I will say the ending also did feel a little rushed, and like I know that sometimes in historical romances it's rushed anyway, but this was like rushed more than usual, and it just kind of like ended and there were questions and I was like, excuse me, I would like the answers to those, please. And will we get them? I don't know. This is a trilogy, like I said, so each book follows a different brother, so maybe in the second one we'll get a couple of answers to the questions I had from this, but it was good. I really enjoyed it. Like I said, it got 4.5 stars from me. I'm so excited to continue reading more things by this author. I think she's great. The next one that I ended up picking up was Picture Us in the Light by Kelly Lloyd Gilbert. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. So I really enjoyed this book, but this one's really hard for me to talk about because there's not really a plot. I mean, there is a plot, but I don't know how to explain it to you. But it does follow our main character, Danny, who is Asian American. He comes from an Asian American family, and he's also part of the LGBTQIA+ community, but it's never expressly said like what he identifies, which I felt was fine. He's an artist and he gets into art school and he's a senior in high school and it's like it's a big thing, and he finds this box in the cabinet when his parents are out one day, and it's all of these clippings that revolve around this specific family. And he asks his dad about it, and his dad like freaks out and says, you can never ask about this again, you can never bring this up with your mom, like we're done. And he finds that a little bizarre, but he kind of goes with it, and then things spiral from there. So this is really all about family and family trust and the mystery that surrounds this box. That's basically all I can say. And I'm not even quite sure what my feelings on this book are. I know that I liked it. I know that it was good. I know that at the beginning I was like, this is okay. And then I got sucked in really quickly and I was on the edge of my seat. And it felt great. It felt very realistic for like, if a teenage boy was going through some of the things that this character was going through, he would probably react the way this character did. I will say that I really enjoyed the ending of this book because it doesn't end with a, look, picture perfect bow, yay, but it also doesn't have a cliffhanger, so you do get some answers, but you don't get all of the answers, which I feel like is very realistic. You don't get some of the answers and some of the endings that you want to happen, but again, that feels very realistic. It feels very kind of like what might happen if these people were actually in these situations. So it felt very realistic in that sense. But I'm still not even quite sure what to tell you about it. It was good. I really enjoyed it. But things happened in it, and I can't tell you about them, but I liked it. The next book that I picked up was Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert. This got 5 stars. I'm obsessed with this book. I'm obsessed with this author. I loved this. So this book follows Chloe Brown, who has just barely, well, maybe not just barely, she almost gets hit by a car. Let's just say that. And because of that, she's like, oh my gosh, I haven't lived my life. I need to make a list to get a life. And so she makes a list of things like enjoy a drunken night out, ride a motorcycle, go camping, things like that. And she moves out of her parents' house into this little apartment, and she's trying to get a life. One thing to note about Chloe is that she is chronically ill. So she's got, I don't remember what it is, but they do say it in this book, but she's always in pain. She can't really move very often, very quickly, just like little things like that. So her two sisters, Danny and Eve, are always coming around to make sure she's good. However, in the place that she has, this little apartment she has now, the handyman's name is Red, and they did not get off on the right foot. He always came in when something bad was happening, and it was like he didn't know the whole story, but he looked at her weird. But he's had an issue in the past with an ex-girlfriend who was very, very posh and treated him very badly. And so he's got this kind of like bad feeling when it comes to her. But they end up striking this bargain between the two of them where he's going to help her kind of complete this list. And then, you know, feelings. But this book has a trigger warning at the beginning, which I will say again, think that all books should have trigger warnings in the beginning of this book. But it says, this story touches on the process of healing after an abusive relationship. If this is a topic that you're sensitive to, please be aware. I hope I have treated the issue, my characters, and you, the reader, gently. So abusive relationships is a huge thing in this book, specifically for Red, but I would say that Chloe also has some issues in her past with relationships. This book is steamy. The tension between our characters was immaculate. This book is very, very British, and I loved every second of it. They curse a lot more than Americans, is what I've discovered. So basically what I'm saying is I should be British. And I'm not saying that like it's a bad thing. I loved this book. I loved the writing. It's very abrupt. She has a very humorous way of writing. I cannot wait to read the other two books in this series. I want them immediately because this was so good. I flew through this book. I was giggling the entire time. It definitely touches, obviously, on some darker subjects, but she does it in a way that's just fun. So I can't speak to any of the rep, obviously, within this book, but there is some in here, so I would check this out if you were curious about, you know, this book. And it was great. That's all I gotta say is it was great. It was very realistic. This felt like a healthy relationship because there wasn't a moment of, like, misunderstanding to the extent that you usually see it as a trope in some romance books. This, I think, was handled very well. And these two are very flawed people coming together. And I loved it. Hello, Editing Kelsey here. The very last book that I read in May, the audio is completely messed up for that clip, so we're just going to talk about it again here shortly. But the last book that I picked up, I said May, didn't I? The last book that I read in April was Grown by Tiffany D. Jackson. I ended up giving this one 4 stars, if I remember correctly. This is a great book, but it's also a book that, like, I'm not quite sure what my feelings are on it. It's been like a week, but I'm still, like, not sure how to process everything. The only way that I can, like, equate this to is if you've ever learned information about something that's just absolutely horrific or like changes your worldview a little bit and you can't not think about it. That's kind of how I feel about this book. This book follows our main character, Enchanted, who wants to be a singer-songwriter. She's got an incredible voice. Everyone around her thinks that, you know, she can really sing. And she gets discovered by this big kind of R&B pop star named Corey Fields. And he kind of gets to know her under this disguise of like trying to groom her to be a star and give her voice lessons and get her kind of like a step into the music world. But really, this book is all about grooming of young girls, relationships between young girls and much, much older men, and just a whole lot of other stuff. There is a trigger warning at the beginning of this book, which I am going to read to you because I will say this every single time. There should always be content warnings in the beginnings of books. But this says, content warning, mentions of sexual abuse, rape, assault, child abuse, kidnapping, and addiction to opioids. This book is incredibly important. I think it really focuses on this relationship that is very flawed and starts off great at first and then ends terribly, and kind of this young girl being persuaded to think specific things, kind of like, you know, grooming someone to think certain things. And I don't know, it's just, it's tough. It's really, really tough to get through. It's a very tough subject, but I think it's an incredibly important subject. I like that this is a YA book. It's written for kind of younger-ish readers, and so it really can resonate with girls like Enchanted, who is 17 in this book, and kind of the idea of a relationship with an older man being super intriguing, but it can turn out not so great. That's just like the surface of what this book is about. This book is definitely like one that you have to go in knowing it's not going to be a comfortable experience. I was uncomfortable the entire time reading this book, but like uncomfortable in a good way, as in if you were comfortable while you're reading this, there's something wrong with you, because like there is so much to this that is wrong and not talked about. And specifically near the end, they get really into kind of the Me Too movement and whether or not girls who come forward saying specific things are believed or not, especially if they're Black girls, they're believed less. And just kind of like a look at the justice system a little bit, even though that's not really what this book is about, but that is a part of it. And I think that Tiffany D. Jackson does a great job of highlighting all of these things in a way that sticks with you, which I think is very important for Enchanted's story. This is a tough story. It's real bad and it's not a great situation, but it's an important story to be told, and I think everyone should read this because of that. Now, this is the first book that I've read by Tiffany D. Jackson. I know she's got a couple other ones out there that do very similar things to this, as far as like taking a very uncomfortable subject and talking about it. So I think, I don't know, I think this is important, and I'm glad that it's geared toward younger readers. And I think everyone should read it because it's incredible. And it makes you really think about a lot of stuff. So I enjoyed it. I mean, I didn't enjoy it, but I am glad that I read it. Does that make sense? You know, like it's not a book that you are going to enjoy, but it's a book that you're going to be glad that you read. So those are my thoughts on Grown. I'll take you back to past Kelsey to wrap this up. That is it. Those are the 15 books that I ended up reading in April. Quite a lot. We've been here for a while. I do apologize, but I hope that you enjoyed this video. Let me know if you've read any of the books that I mentioned in here and what your thoughts on them were, if you have. But if you like this video, and I very, very much hope that you did, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe down below if you want to be part of this awesome growing family. I've also got all my social media as well as other fun bookish links, so don't forget to go check all of those out, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.